Hello, everyone. I hope that you're having a great Monday. I'm barely getting this video finished before the cutoff. It's 12 o'clock at school. I'm at school. But let's go ahead and jump in. We've got a lot to cover today. So let's go ahead and start. Let me share my screen. Okay, so we're going to start with our Bible verse. Don't forget to write it down. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. Ecclesiastes 1:13. Let's have a moment of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this earth. Thank you for all the creatures and plants and beautiful things we can study and learn more about you. I pray that you'll guide me through this lecture and help the students to understand. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So don't forget that you're working on your brochure for your national park that's due on Wednesday. And you need to pause the video now if you've not printed the PowerPoint notes that are in the materials section of Jupiter Ed, because I'm going to go through a PowerPoint where you're going to fill in the notes. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get started with our fill-in notes here. Biomes and aquatic ecosystems. You're going to be able to describe abiotic and biotic factors. You're going to know what a biome is. You're going to be able to list factors that shape aquatic ecosystems and list major categories of freshwater ecosystems and why estuaries are so important and what they are. So life on land, natural biomes. Biomes are defined as large area characterized by its vegetation, soil, climate, and wildlife. All of the abiotic, non-living, and biotic living factors. Each biome is associated with a seasonal pattern of temperature and precipitation that can be summarized in a climate diagram. So this graph over here is the climate diagram. And you can see that in New Orleans, this is the temperature. So we would look over here for the temperature, and then in Celsius. And then this is the amount of rainfall over here, and it doesn't give us the unit there. So we're not sure what unit, if these are milliliters, liters, I'm not sure. But this is a climate diagram. Within a biome, there can be considerable variation among plant and animal communities due to differences in elevation, exposure, or local soil conditions. So just because a biome has a certain set of general descriptions for abiotic and biotic factors, it doesn't mean that it will always be that way in every part of that biome. There can be small differences within one biome. So if you haven't been able to fill in all the notes, pause the video as we go, fill in your notes, and then start again. This map shows all the biomes and where they're located. So you can see that we have tropical grasslands, temperate grasslands, desert, where most of the desert areas are here. You can see the Northwest coniferous forest, the tundra. So you can see all of the biomes. This is another neat graph that tells you if the rain and the temperature are a certain number, what biome will you land in? So let's say that it's -10 degrees and it's 20 centimeters of annual precipitation. And if we go up to 20, we're going to be in the tundra. Is there anything that's -10 with 100 degrees precipitation? No. Let's say that we're 10 degrees and 200 centimeters of precipitation. Then we're in the temperate deciduous forest. So these are the two huge factors, abiotic factors, that determine what a biome will be: precipitation and temperature. Now we're going to look at the major biomes of the earth. The first is the tropical rainforest. It has more species than all other biomes combined. It has tall trees that form a dense leafy covering called the canopy, which is 50 to 80 meters above the forest floor. And then the understory is the shorter trees and vines that are underneath the canopy. The abiotic factors is warm and wet year round, and thin, nutrient poor soil subject to erosion. Biotic factors, and here is a climate diagram of an area that would have a tropical rainforest in Brazil. So you can see that here's where the temperature stays pretty consistent. And then we definitely have a rainy season and then a more dry season, but it's still a lot of precipitation. Plant life, the understory plants compete for sunlight. And so many have very large leaves to try to capture the sunlight. And tall trees often have buttress roots that act like props for support. The animals are active all year. They can camouflage, and many are good at swinging and flying. Think of Tarzan jumping through the canopy of the jungle. The animals there would have similar adaptations. All right, this is the tropical dry forest. Here you can see that the temperature stays pretty consistent in India in the tropical dry forest, but we definitely have a dry season and a more rainy season here. Warm year throughout with alternating wet and dry seasons are the abiotic factors. And then biotic factors, plants lose their leaves during the dry season. They have extra thick waxy coating, kind of like a cactus, to prevent water loss. And many animals reduce their need for water by entering long periods of inactivity. Other birds and primates move to areas where water is available during the dry season. So migration happening. The tropical grasslands, savanna, or shrubland, this one is in Mombasa, Kenya. You can tell that there's a wet season and a more dry season, but the temperature stays fairly consistent. So those are the abiotic factors. It has compact soil, and it has frequent fires that are set by lightning. The plants here are also like the ones in the desert with waxy leaf coverings, and some lose their leaves seasonally. And the grasses here have adapted to enable them to continue to grow after being grazed by the animal life, like gazelles, zebras, buffalo, and many of these animals migrate. This is where the Great Migration happens once a year, where you see in National Geographic, thousands of water buffalo crossing the river with all the crocodiles. That's in this particular biome. The next one that we're going to talk about is the desert. And this is the desert out west in Arizona. You can tell that there's some variation in temperature, and you can tell that there's some months that it rains and some months that it doesn't rain at all. But overall, it's very low precipitation with a variable temperature. The soil is rich in minerals, but poor in organic matter. Many desert plants, cacti, store water in their tissue. And desert animals have to get their water from the food that they eat. They're only active at night to avoid loss of heat, so they are active when it's cooler. And blood vessels are near the skin to help animals lose the body heat. You can think of elephants. Elephants are the same way, even though they don't live in a desert, they live more in the savanna. They have blood vessels on their ears, and they flap their ears, and that's how they cool down. The temperate grassland, this is in Dallas, Texas. You can see that there's definitely some variable temperature here, and there's variable seasonal rainfall. They do have fertile soil with occasional fire. Grassland plants are resistant to grazing and fire, so you can have a lot of cattle out here feeding because the grass will keep growing even after they've fed. Dispersal of seeds by wind, and the root structure of native grassland plants helps to establish and retain deep, rich, fertile topsoil. And then some biotic factors continued. The animals, these exposed environments make predation a constant threat for smaller animals, and camouflage and burrowing are common. So we can have prairie dogs, rabbits, coyotes, things like that, preying on the rabbits in this particular biome. Temperate woodland and shrubland, here is Los Angeles, California. You can see that it's pretty consistent temperature, and definitely with a wet season and a dry season. It has thin, nutrient-poor soil, so this is not where we grow all of our food. And it does have periodic fires, which you see on the news. California is on fire, and it's not unusual. They do have fires in that area. The plants are woody chaparral plants, tough waxy leaves to resist water loss, and they're fire resistant. So Even some plants have to have a fire in order to open up their seed pods to be able to grow and germinate new plants. The biotic factors for animals tend to eat a variety of grasses, leaves, and shrubs, and camouflage is common, like you see with this deer. Now we're in the temperate forest, and you can see that we have a big change in temperature, but we have pretty steady rainfall in this particular biome. This is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There is year-round rain. The fertile soils, they're rich in humus, which we have talked about before. It's material formed from decaying leaves and other organic matter. Plant life, deciduous trees drop their leaves, they go into dormancy. Conifers minimize water loss in dry winter air. They have needles instead of leaves. Animals cope with the changing weather by hibernating. Think of bears, or migrating to warmer climate. Birds and other insects will migrate to other areas. And animals may be camouflaged to escape predation in the winter when the trees are bare. So think of animals that are brown that would fit in with a bunch of brown tree trunks. Northwestern coniferous forest is, you can see here, we've got a little change in temperature and we have a big swing in rainy season, and then a less rainy season. This area biome is rocky and has acidic soils. It rains in the fall, winter, and spring, so less in the summer. There's less diversity here than in the tropical rainforest because of the seasonal temperature change, but there is ample water and nutrients to support all of the lush, dense tree growth that we have in this area. And this is in Seattle, Washington. The animals can camouflage, and many are browsers. So there's herbivores here browsing on all the dense vegetation. Boreal forest is, we have it here in Fairbanks, Alaska. And it's, goodness, look at that temperature change. So we definitely don't want to be in Alaska here or here, maybe go visit here. And then you do have seasonal rainfall here with less rain in the winter months. It's acidic, nutrient poor soil. It has high humidity. Conifers, shade, and wax covered. Needle-like leaves shed snow. So you don't have a huge leaf that has a large surface area that would collect a lot of snow that might hurt the branch, make the branch fall off. You have needles where the snow can just shake off the needles easily with a wind, with a slight wind. Most animals have small extremities and extra insulation. So lots of feathers, lots of fat. Polar bears, penguins, all kinds of animals that are different types of birds having more feathers, down feathers. The tundra, so we have the strong winds, low precipitation. We definitely have a temperature change here. We have long, cold, dark winters and thin soil. And there's a permafrost, which is a permanently frozen subsoil layer. We don't really have a lot of big, tall plants here. There is strong winds, and so we have more mosses and other low-growing plants. Animals will migrate to avoid the bad winters. And if it does live there, then that animal has a way to stay warm and extremely small extremities that limit the heat loss. Border the tundra, the polar regions are cold year round, and few plants aside from algae, that's and lichen and mosses, anything that can grow close to the ground will grow here. Let's see, some of it's covered by sea ice, and in the Antarctica, it can be 5 kilometers thick in places. Okay, now we're going to talk about marine ecosystems. So there's different ways to describe. We were describing abiotic, biotic factors, precipitation, and temperature for the most part with the biomes. For marine ecosystems, we're going to talk about the saltiness of the marine ecosystem, the water, the depth of the water. Saltiness is known as salinity, the depth of the water, the temperature of the water, the flow rate or current of the water, and the concentration of other dissolved nutrients in the water. Ecologists usually divide the ocean into zones based on depth and distance from the shore. So you have the photic zone, where sunlight can reach this particular area where photosynthesis can occur. It can be as deep as 200 meters in tropical seas or just a few meters in rivers and swamps. Then you have the aphotic zone, which is a dark region where photosynthesis cannot occur. One of the most important biotic factors in a marine ecosystem are plankton, which are the small free-swimming animals called zooplankton and floating algae called phytoplankton. And this is the base of the food chain in a marine ecosystem. So here you can see that this is the photic zone, the aphotic zone. You have the intertidal zone, the coastal ocean, then the open ocean. This area right here is where photosynthesis can occur. It cannot occur in this area here. So let's learn a little bit more about that intertidal zone, which if you look here, we're talking about this area right here on the graph. It's intertidal zones are submerged. The organisms are submerged in seawater at high tide and exposed to air and sunlight at low tide. They experience regular and extreme temperature changes and often are battered by waves and currents. Typical rocky intertidal community exists in temperate regions where the exposed rocks lie in the shore, and barnacles, seaweed permanently attach themselves to rocks. In our area, we have mussels, oysters that attach themselves to rocks in this particular zone. The coastal zone, which if we go back to our graph, now we're talking about this area right here. The coastal zone extends from the low tide mark to the outer edge of the continental shelf. I think, yes, here's our continental shelf right here. So from here to the low tide mark here. Water here is brightly lit, often supplied with nutrients by freshwater runoff from the land, and kelp forests and coral reefs are two important coastal communities. So in Florida, there is Biscayne Bay National Park, and you can go out about 20 miles, 15 miles from shore and scuba dive and see the coral reef. And so when you do that, you are in this zone right here. And you're kind of at the edge of it because when you're scuba diving, looking at the coral reef, you can see the cliff that drops off into the abyss. The open ocean, so now we're here, out here in the open ocean area. This particular begins at the edge of the continental shelf and extends out. More than 90% of the world's ocean are open ocean. It can range in depth from 500 meters to 10,000 meters. And we have the open ocean photic zone where the sunlit top 100 meters, so photosynthesis can occur there. And then the open ocean aphotic zone, which is permanently dark. And then we have deep sea vents, which are superheated water boils out of cracks on the ocean floor and supports an entire ecosystem based on chemical energy. We talked about that when we were talking about energy flow, that for the most part, the sunlight provides us with our energy, but that there are places where bacteria can convert chemical energy from these vents, these deep sea vents, into and metabolize it for energy. Now we're going to switch and talk about freshwater ecosystems. Only 3% of the Earth's surface is freshwater. This includes rivers, streams, creeks, brooks. They often originate from underground sources. Water has dissolved oxygen and sediments build up and flow downstream. Let's see. Often a chain of streams and rivers begins in the interior of a continent and flows through several different types of biomes heading to the sea. Much of the life in the lakes and ponds depends on a combination of plankton and attached algae and plants, and the water circulates between the surface and the bottom during some seasons. So I think we talked about this as well before, about the lake when it flips when the water on top becomes colder than the water on the bottom, so the water on top is more dense. So that top water will flow down to the bottom, and then the warmer water will flow up to the top. So the the lake flips during the fall. Wetlands, an ecosystem in which water covers the soil or is present at or near the surface or at least part of the year. Water may flow through freshwater wetlands or stay in place. And wetlands are nutrient rich. They're highly productive. This is the nursery of the animals in these ecosystems. This is where the breeding grounds are. They help us because they filter out pollutants, and they help prevent flooding by absorbing large amounts of water. There are three main types of freshwater wetlands. We have freshwater bogs, freshwater marshes, and freshwater swamps. An estuary is a wetland form where a river meets the sea. This is where we have brackish water, where the freshwater and saltwater mix. These are also nurseries for a lot of fish and shellfish. Salt marshes are the temperate estuaries with salt-tolerant grasses above the low tide line and seagrasses below water. So this is like the Chesapeake Bay. We have this in South Carolina as well. We don't have mangrove swamps in South Carolina. We have those in Florida, but these are tropical estuaries with several species of salt-tolerant trees called mangroves. And I think I have a picture. Yeah, so this is how mangroves grow, with these root or branches that called prop roots that go down into the salty water, and then the tree is up top. Okay, so that is the end of the prepared notes. So now I'm going to give you an assignment based on what we're talking about. So we're going to talk about some new subjects. So that ended biomes and ecosystems. So now we're going to talk about forests. So when a forest is cut down, okay, here we go. So if I cut down a forest, the first thing that's going to come it's going to be a bare field, and then you start to get your weeds, okay, just general weeds. Then you start seeing these really funky light green, feathery looking plants, the broom's edge type plants that start growing up a little taller. Then you might start getting some tiny trees, some woody shrubs that are starting to grow. Definitely sweet gum, yellow poplar would be growing by this point. And then you get your pine trees after that. And then finally you get your oak and your shortleaf pine, your poplar, hickory, and oak. That's your mature forest. When it's at this end here, then that's your mature forest. And it takes 70 to 80 years for a bare field, to become a mature forest. We have some property in Powdersville, and it used to be grass, but we let it grow, and it's been growing for about 10 years now. And we're already at the pine stage right here. We've got, definitely have sweet gums, yellow poplars, we have pine trees in the area. So we're right in here with our forest succession in terms of trying to grow it to a mature forest. So let me go back to these definitions that are also in your book. Succession is the replacement of one type of community by another at a single location over a period of time. The pioneer species are the first organisms to appear in the newly made habitat. An ecosystem responds to change in such a way that the ecosystem is restored to balance. It's restored to its equilibrium. So when we get to here, this is in balance. So you see you have some grasses, you have some broom's hedge, you have some woody shrubs and sweet gums, you have some pine trees, and then you also have your mature oaks. So this is a mature forest back in equilibrium with each type of plant represented. Now we're going to talk about native species and invasive species. So in this particular mature forest, we could have a plant from Japan or something like kudzu that comes in and messes up this succession of growing a forest. We're all very familiar with kudzu growing everywhere, and kudzu is what's called an invasive species. It's a non-native plant or animal brought on purpose or by accident into a new ecosystem. The most horrifying invasive species, in my opinion, are the giant bugs that come in from Amazon packages when they come from across seas, and then you open it up and there's, you know, some kind of giant bug that you've never seen before that definitely does not belong here, but came over from overseas in your box. Now, if it belongs here, like we do have some big water bugs, palmetto bugs that belong here, those are in this ecosystem by God's design. So let's look at this local article about invasive species. Okay, so those are just a few of the invasive species that are here in South Carolina. Oh, so what I want you to do is to look up and find one example of an invasive species in South Carolina and bring 3 facts about it to share on Wednesday. And you can do that on the back of your PowerPoint notes that you have. Now we're going to talk about a totally different subject. We're going to talk about the animals within each biome and how they interact with one another. The first word we're going to talk about is predation, which is interaction between 2 organisms in which the organism, the predator, kills and feeds on the other organism, the prey. And so let's watch this one real fast.
Although their survival in the wild is threatened, we think of lions as the top predators on the African plains. And they are. Proud. Powerful. Deadly. But just because they're bigger and stronger than everyone else doesn't mean they don't have enemies. Enemies who are willing to engage when the odds are in their favor. It's an aspect of lion life Craig and his field team have been studying extensively at the Serengeti Lion Project, not far from Medutu. Leo hopes their results might provide some useful information about the rare attack he witnessed. The team is trying to learn exactly how predators coexist, or don't, as the case may be. Led by graduate student Allie Swanson, Craig's study uses camera traps to capture predator interactions.
We have 200 cameras set up across the study area, which is 1,000 square kilometers. And we have so many traps because, a few pictures can give us an anecdote about what these animals are doing, but hundreds or thousands gives us a story. And these trees seem to catch the full suite of species. Like this one tree has caught lions, leopards, cheetahs, and hyenas, just at different times. Oh, hyenas. Leopard.
Surveillance cameras at a 24-hour convenience store. The traps reveal the comings and goings of all the local residents. The hyenas are the most frequent shoppers.
There's an aardvark, and then hyenas. Hyenas after hyenas after hyenas.
Hyenas outnumber lions 3 to 1 in this part of Africa and are quick to use their numbers to their advantage. Covering the same ground. Hunting the same prey. And scavenging the same leftovers. The two species often come into conflict. Steal from each other. And even seem to wage all-out war. The battles can be savage. The two species also go after each other's young. It's easier to take out the competition before the competition can fight back. This infanticide is a large part of what makes lions and hyenas mortal enemies.
Okay. So we definitely saw one organism feeding on another. So symbiosis is a relationship in which two different species, two different animals, plants live in close association with each other. And we have three types. We have mutualism, where they both benefit, everybody benefits. Commensalism, where one benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefited. And then we have parasitism, where the parasite benefits from the other species, the host is harmed. So that's what's this video about, these relationships.
We're expanding.
in the ocean in Southeast Asia, getting ready to search for a fish that lives in a place so dangerous that most other fish won't even come near it. Ready? Let's go diving.
And after a bit of searching, I finally found it. The clownfish, or anemone fish as it's also called. The beautiful tentacles of the anemone are actually deadly to most fish. The tentacles have stinging organs called nematocysts, which fire tiny darts into fish that brush by. This stinging ability protects anemones from predators and helps them capture prey for food. But how can clownfish hide in such a dangerous place?
Well, that's because clownfish have a symbiotic relationship with anemones that is so important that clownfish are almost always found among anemones. Symbiotic relationships are interactions between two species that can benefit either one or both species. Symbiotic relationships are divided up into three major categories.
Parasitism benefits one species while the other is harmed. Like ticks, for example. There are many examples here in the ocean. Take parasitic fish lice, for example, that cling to a host fish and feed on its body fluids. Amazingly, fish will sometimes find a cleaner fish or cleaner shrimp to help remove the parasites from their scales, mouth, and gills. When this happens, a mutualistic relationship is formed between the fish and the cleaner organism. Mutualism is a symbiotic relationship in which both species benefit from the relationship. This bird here eats the tick, which benefits the cow. In our fish example, the host fish is clean off its parasites, and the cleaner fish gets a free meal. Both species benefit, but not the sea lice anymore. Hey, I already brushed my teeth today.
The third symbiotic relationship is commensalism. Commensalism benefits one organism, but the other one is neither harmed nor helped.
You might have had a bug hitchhiking on you at some point without knowing it. An example here in the ocean is when remoras hitch a ride on sharks, big rays, or turtles. The remora attaches itself with a disc on its head and then hitch a ride and feed off the food scraps the host animal leave behind.
So the sharks are not affected by the remoras being there, but the remoras get a free ride and a free meal. Sounds good to me.
So back to our clownfish. Clownfish are protected from predators by living among anemones, and in exchange, the clownfish chase away fish and other animals that can harm the anemone. What kind of symbiotic relationship is this? That's right, mutualistic. Okay, but we still have one important question to answer. How can the clownfish be immune to the anemone sting? Well, a clownfish must first get used to its host anemone by developing a protective mucus coating, kind of like when we use sunscreen. And there are two possible explanations for how this happens. The first explanation is that the clownfish secretes its own mucus, which lacks the substance that makes the anemone fire its stinging nematocysts. It's as if the clownfish had a protective force field or invisible cape. And the second explanation is that the clownfish uses mucus produced by the anemone. The unprotected clownfish initially touches the anemone with its fins, even getting stung slightly at first, but over time gains the protective mucus coating. Symbiotic relationships happen everywhere, even in our own bodies. Did you know that every time you eat yogurt, you're actually filling up your digestive tract with symbiotic bacteria? That's right, you become the host for these natural bacteria, and they help you process and digest the food that you eat every day. Right, so next time you go outside, stop and look around and see how many symbiotic relationships you can spot around you and report what they are. And remember, never stop exploring your world.
Okay, here is another quick video on parasites.
Peace out, leaving home. Just next door, in an even smaller nest, the female reed warbler incubates its 4 eggs. One of the brood is starting to hatch. However, it is not the young reed warbler. 2 weeks ago, a female cuckoo, unseen by the reed warbler, dropped her egg into this nest. Now the young cuckoo hatches. As the first of the brood, the reed warbler did not notice the trick, but now feeds the young as if it were its own. The young cuckoo needs to throw the other eggs out of the nest. If it doesn't do this, then the parents will not be able to feed all the nestlings. But the first attempts are not successful. The cuckoo is still too weak. It tries again. It must push the egg above the edge of the nest. It is a big effort. The determination of the weak cuckoo nestling to get rid of the competition is amazing to see. After a few hours, it has another go. This time, there's some success. The first egg landed in the water. When it throws out the second egg, the cuckoo almost follows it out of the nest itself. Now, for the last one. Alone at last. The ever-open, bright red beak and the constant peeping from the cuckoo prompts the reed warblers to bring it food without a break. Now all the insects and spiders end up in its beak. With such intensive feeding, the young cuckoo reaches its adult size in just 2 weeks. It is so large that when it sits on the nest, it must hold tight so it doesn't fall off. With a strong wind, the nest may even break apart under its weight. Although the cuckoo is by now much bigger than the reed warblers, they still treat it as if it's one of their own nestlings. Even after it has left the nest, they will still feed it. At the end of August, the young cuckoo will start its lonely journey to Africa. It will return next spring, maybe even to the same reed bed, and try to toss an egg into a reed warbler's nest.
Oops, I did not mean to do that. Let's go back. Okay, so we are on parasitism, and if you will come to class on Wednesday with one example of symbiosis to share with us. So you have your notes to bring in on Wednesday, one example of symbiosis, one example of an invasive species in South Carolina, and your national park brochure. I would like for you to add to your brochure the biome that we learned here with some information about that biome. So find out what biome your national park is in so that you can include some information that we learned today on your brochure. Abiotic, biotic factors, precipitation, and temperature. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you on Wednesday.